Greetings, friends. It's time for another DIYary. This time, the problem I'm dealing with is actually a video security camera. Just to give you a little background, but hopefully without depressing you, what you see before you is my car. And I'm fortunate that my apartment happens to line up in such a way that I can position a camera in a window somewhere, I'm not going to be real specific here, to point at my car. And the reason I'm doing that is because earlier this month, the car that was there before was no longer there. I went for a walk. We have a driveway around the apartment complex. It's in kind of a U shape. I went to the other side of the U and started walking around. When I got back around near my apartment, I noticed that my car wasn't there. It was a total surprise. My car got stolen, if you haven't figured out what I'm getting at. So I got a replacement car, and now I want to set up a camera, and I'm still unfortunately unemployed at this moment. So I have to use what little bits and pieces I have on hand to try and cobble something together. I did buy one new piece, which was an easy capture. It's basically a USB stick with some wires coming out of it. You plug it into your computer, and you can plug your video source into it, and it will actually transfer. It'll do what it needs to do to get the video into your computer. And then you need to have the software behind it, which is part of this project. So I've tested that out, and if you want, you can watch. I have an unboxing video for the Easy Capture card. I'll spare you all of the details on how that works. Suffice it to say, you plug it into the computer, you hook up your video source, and then the rest of it is a matter of figuring out software and making sure your hardware works properly. Now, for this, hopefully by now you can see that there's actually something moving in the picture, but just in case, I've actually got a switcher, so I'm going to go ahead and switch this real quick so you can see I've got something else. You can see video. Now that is not the capture card. That is the, I'm going to switch back here. That is the, my monitor has multiple inputs, so I plug the video source into the back of my monitor so I could actually watch, but that's not recording, which is what I want. So that said, we need to jump forward, and I need to show you that I've figured out how to get the video working plugged into the computer. Okay, so now to prove that it actually works, I'm pointed at the other monitor. I have two monitors on my system. This is an old XP box, so unfortunately I can't really do much about screen capture, which is why I've got the camera pointed at the monitor, and you might see it gets a little out of sync here and there. But the software that came with the unit is this program here, so I'm going to bring that up. Oh, you gotta be kidding, it's asking for the product key again? Alright, let me go enter that in, I'll be right back. Okay, now the software has loaded. Let me, I'm going to go ahead and clear that little message. Oh, there's another message. I don't know why it did that. I'm going to blame it on the software. And that's my zone alarm, which is a really old firewall program that's just bugging the heck out of me. But I wanted to prove that it actually works. Now, unfortunately, one of the problems I ran into is that the camera, the way it delivers the signal, and it took me a while to figure this out, it's the way the camera is delivering the signal to the software that, yeah, I don't think it's the capture card. I think it's the camera. And there's something wrong inside the camera that's creating a problem. And just to prove it, remember I showed you I could switch, so I'm going to switch my source here. And so let's get something else, and you'll see in a moment it'll pop up there. There's the old hockey game that's going on. So you can see that I've got it now coming through the capture card. If I were to pan over so you can see the other, you can see that's the window that it was in before. So now I'm going to pan it back here. So I've confirmed that the video capture card works. I know that the camera has a problem, and I was thinking, oh great, this is never going to work. But then ultimately I realized I had a second camera. It just happens that I used to manage an apartment complex, and they had a security system there, and they had two DVRs, both of which were 4-channel DVRs. And I figured out how to actually combine the two for a total of 7 channels by basically taking the output from one of the 4-channel DVRs and putting it to the input of the second 4-channel DVR, which gave me an additional 3 channels for a total of 7. Because of that, I found myself out looking for cameras, and so that I could add additional angles at the apartment complex to capture some other stuff. And I should also mention, this apartment complex where I live, they do have a security system. I'm not going to say how many channels they have. I'm not going to tell you where the angles are. But I did manage to catch on video the person who stole my car entering the complex, choosing my car, taking my car, and driving away. And I won't say too much more in terms of revealing angles there, but I'll show you real quickly here just a little bit of the video of that person actually driving off with my car. Now that we've looked at that, and let me go ahead and actually switch back out of here because I don't want to get in copyright trouble for showing you, whoops. Because I don't want to get into copyright trouble for showing you what was broadcast on TV. In fact, I may end up blurring that out just to protect myself. But ultimately what I discovered with the 2 cameras that I have is that the second camera delivers a signal that this system can handle, but that camera overheats. And I suspect that the problem with the camera is the little infrared LEDs that are supposed to help with night vision. Those LEDs, which I ended up covering up because I have the camera right up against a window, and the LEDs will reflect off the glass of the window right back into the lens of the camera, thus blotting out pretty much anything recognizable that I could see. So I had covered up all of the LEDs, and I think what was happening was that there was some kind of process going on inside the camera. Now, I have a bit of an engineering background, but I suspect what it was the little light sensor that determines whether it's daytime or nighttime, and in turn would turn on those LEDs so that they could light up the night with infrared so you could get night vision out of it, essentially. That I covered up all of the LEDs, and I think what happened when I covered up the light sensor is that it said, oh, it's even darker, so it tried to make the LEDs brighter, and in trying to make them brighter, it was just generating so much heat from those LEDs that it was heating up the camera. So my next trick is I'm going to actually take apart that camera and see if I can find a way to switch those LEDs on and off while still leaving the light sensor active, so that, because I actually have, there's plenty of outside lights that go on at night around here. We've good security lighting, and there's plenty of lights that come on, so I don't actually need the IR LEDs to actually light up the night for me, and that will basically make it so I can put it in the window and not have to worry about the reflection. So that's our next step, is I'm going to actually dig into that camera and I'll show you what I'm doing. Alright, here we go. This is the camera that, this is the one that had the heat problem, but it does deliver the video correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into this, and I'll just edit out the boring stuff so you can kind of see how I did this. First of all, there's this shroud, or whatever you want to, it's basically a light cover that actually normally would go on the camera on this direction, and it's designed so that if I could sort of demonstrate well, you know what, actually first I'll go ahead and peel this off. This was part of my solution to the camera having that reflection problem. I discovered this with the other camera, which actually right now has the exact same thing. This is just gaffing tape, which is pretty much the same thing as duct tape. I'm going to peel this off. I put that on to create a sort of a shield. I'm trying to think of what the name of it is. But the idea is, like, if you've ever seen a camera, a regular like professional or prosumer level camera that has the has a little thing around it like that. That's if you have like a fisheye lens or something to give you a wider angle. It's because those let in a lot more light, and you need that shade to block light from coming in, say from this angle on the side here. You really want more direct light coming in. If you get light coming in from this side, you end up getting flares in your pictures. So I put it that way to try and prevent the actually it was the light outside that was bouncing off the window, and when you go through a window it changes the angle of the light, so it was bouncing up into the lens the wrong way. So by putting that shield around it, I was trying to prevent that problem. Now this is the tape. I don't know how well you can see that. It's literally just electrical tape that I put all over it, and I tried to leave a little gap right here for the photo sensor, for the light sensor, and that just didn't quite work on this one. So I'm going to peel off all of this tape, revealing the LEDs. Now I don't know how well you can see that. All those little spots that you see around that center lens, all those little spots are the LEDs. Those light up. They have a little bit of a red glow. They're infrared LEDs. Most infrared LEDs will give you a bit of a red glow, but infrared is actually in the light spectrum below red. So they're not a visible light, but there is actual light coming out of those LEDs, and that is what the camera is using to be able to see in the dark. I ultimately want to turn all of those off. And the other thing was, with the camera that's currently up, the second camera that has the problem delivering the video, that camera, half the LEDs are already burned out, so I suspect that's why it's not overheating. Now I looked around on the camera and I realized that there are screws on the back here. I hope you can kind of see that. So I'm going to go ahead. Oh, I was starting to tell you about this shroud. Ultimately, this is the same thing as I was saying about like the fisheye lens. This is basically preventing light from up above coming down and creating flares on your lens. So these are good to have in an outdoor installation. I didn't need it for an outdoor. This is an indoor installation, so what I do is I took it and reversed it, put it on the bottom of the camera like so, because the camera is round and I was trying to sit it down on a flat surface, and fortunately this is mostly flat on the top. So that's all I was doing, was just kind of using the parts that I had to fulfill my purpose. So now I'm going to grab a screwdriver and one of my little Harbor Freight screwdriver set, and I'm going to try to remove these screws. Now I should probably say while I'm doing this that if you don't feel comfortable doing this, then your choice is basically, if your camera's giving you trouble like it was giving me, your choice is to go out and get another camera. I'm trying to do this with parts that I already had. Let me try and pull that out carefully. Yep, as I suspected. This entire unit is all together behind that glass. When I pull it out, I don't know if you can see it, but the LEDs are diving down there. So really, this is, oh my gosh. I got a little bag of silica in the camera. That's interesting. I wonder if that was supposed to be in the packaging. I guess it would kind of make sense to have it in there to absorb any moisture so it doesn't affect the circuitry, but that's basically just a clear ring. Now I can actually get in there and really clean the heck out of the sucker to make sure that I don't have any problems. This is really what these cameras look like. It's just a board with a lens on it, which I don't want to touch because it's harder to clean this part than it is to clean this part. But it's all of these LEDs that I want to disable. So now I've got to actually figure out how this circuit is wired up. So I'm going to figure that out, then I'll come back and let you know what I figure out. I'll also tell you what the model number is on this one, in case somebody actually wants to try and modify one of their cameras for the same reason. Okay, folks, it took some doing. I started with just trying to look at it, trying to look at the back side of the trace of the circuit board. You know what, let me actually turn on my video light. It took a little doing. I kind of started with trying to look at the front side of this to see what I could see, looking at the back side of the circuit board, but I realized the front side, it's really hard to see the traces. I ended up pulling out my reading glasses and a magnifying glass to try and really be able to read what was on here, trace the circuit and see what it was doing. Even tried an old trick where you can actually, sometimes you can put things on top of the flatbed, on top of a flatbed scanner to try and take a picture, but the light inside the scanner is just not bright enough, and ultimately this was this side of the board was actually painted a very dark color, I think for anti-reflective properties, so you didn't have light popping in and bouncing off this board and then bouncing off the inside of the glass, which could create its own set of problems. Ultimately what I ended up doing was I ended up using this same camera that I'm recording this video with and taking a picture. Let me show you that real quick. In macro mode, so that I can actually see what was going on. And if you look at it carefully, you'll be able to see that there is a label near the bottom and a bit off to the right. You'll see there's a little notch near the bottom, and then 3 LEDs, and then you'll see 3 little solder joints, and one of them is labeled IRV. The other 2 are 12 volt and ground, so I think IRV means IR voltage. So on that assumption, which may not be correct, I can see that there's a particular wire here. This yellow wire matches up with that, and that does kind of make sense, because 12 volt would be the red one, ground would be the black one, and then the IRV, or IR voltage, if I'm correct, is going to be this yellow one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and cut it part way down, probably about this far down, so that if I'm wrong, I can join it back together with a little piece of electrical tape. So let me go get a pair of scissors and we'll give that a shot. So for those of you engineers or technicians out there that might be asking, why not use a pair of wire snippers? Because I'm a generous guy and I loaned out my wire snippers and I haven't gotten them back yet. So here we go. We're going to do the operation. We're going to go ahead and cut the yellow wire. Kind of feels like defusing a bomb. Snip. That's done. So now I'm going to put this back together loosely and try and hook it up and see what happens, and I'll get back to you. Okay, hopefully you can see this. It is working, so I did not cut the wrong wire, but that doesn't actually prove that I've defeated the infrared lights. So, and you can see that it's totally crooked right now because I didn't put the shroud back on it to try and keep it nice and level. There's a part at the bottom of the camera, which I'll show you in a minute, which makes it almost impossible. It's just like a giant circle, and you put it down and it'll just roll until it decides that it wants to stop. And that's where it ended up. But I successfully cut the wire without killing the camera. That's the first step. Now I'm going to put a piece of electrical tape over the light sensor and we'll see what it looks like. Okay, well, we have success and failure at the same time. I did remember to bring the shroud back with me, and so I've got it right side up, but if you could, I don't know how well it's going to come through on the video, but if you can see all those little sort of dots of light, those are the IR LEDs lighting up. So despite the fact that I disconnected the IR LED, I've somehow still got them turning on. So at this point, the next option may simply be to turn this into a black and white camera by completely disconnecting that board, which would mean that it's going to think, if I'm correct, it's going to think that the light sensor is not encountering any light, therefore it's dark, so it's going to internally turn itself into black and white mode and try and record in that mode and deal with whatever it does for light compensation. So let me go get it and I'll show you. Okay, well, what can I say? I'm disappointed, but ultimately that's the reason why I do these DIYaries. It's not just a how-to, it's kind of what I went through as I was attempting to do something. So you get to see the reality of trying to do these sort of projects, and hopefully my mistakes will prevent you from having the same problem. So that said, let's take the shroud back off. I'm sure there's a better name for it. That's what I'm calling it for now. Another thing I noticed when I went to go put it back together is that the three little screw holes, let me see if I can try and get a good angle there. The three little screw holes like this one, that one, and so on, actually are important in terms of their location. When you pull it out, it indexes against these three, yeah, maybe you can see three separate, there's three of these little areas, these little channels, and there's three notches in the circuit board. There's one up here. I hope you can see that. It's kind of important because if you put it back in the wrong way, what you end up with is a camera that's 60 degrees off in one direction or another. So when you go to line it up and everything, it's just not going to, you're going to be looking at a picture that's 60 degrees off. So fortunately I managed to figure it out, and now I know how to, if you stare at it long enough, you'll figure out how to put it back together correctly. So what I wanted to show you is that there's a connector right here that's connected to the back of this entire board. That's what I'm going to disconnect. I'm not going to cut all the wires. That would be crazy. I cut one already. It would be hard enough to patch that one up. So I'm just going to disconnect this. I'm going to hook it up again and we'll see what it ends up looking like. So that should be as simple as just carefully wiggling this puppy out. Try and get it out, and I can feel it. There it is. Now it's out. So I'm just going to tuck this back in here, put it back together, hook it up, and I'll show you what it looks like. Well, what do you know? Even with the entire thing unplugged, it's still giving me color. So it looks like I lucked out there. I had a suspicion that might happen. I think I've done this kind of modification before, and I can't remember exactly what I did. But I'm just happy that this is working. And actually, as it stands, I put the cover back on, I put it all back together, and so the electrical tape that I'd put over the sensor is still there. So it should be blocking it out and telling it that it should be black and white. So I think what's going to happen now, if I'm not mistaken, and I'll have to shoot a little bit more for this video after the sun goes down, which is a few more hours away, but I suspect that what it's going to try to do is it's going to try to render in color even at night. But then there are other parts of the circuit that will kick in to try and handle the fact that it's low light. The thing is, the reality at this particular scene that we're looking at, I mean, you can see the color, but you can see that little pinwheel is the one that just moved a little bit, that's in color. If you look, the color rendition on this thing is pretty horrible, because all of the bushes on either side of that doorway are actually green, not purple. And that's just because there is no IR cut filter on this camera. It's a cheap camera. But it's good enough for my purposes, and now we've got it working, so now we can move on to the next step. Okay, so now we've buttoned everything up, and there were a couple of things that I did that I didn't record, but I did take a couple of pictures. Let me show you. When I was putting it back together, I took a piece of electrical tape and put it across the silica, the little packet of silica, and attached it to two of the posts so it would just sort of hang there and still do its job. But I did notice there was one other problem with that camera, which I forgot to mention, was that sometimes when I was moving it around, if I turned it vertical, like pointing it at the ceiling, the video would cut out. And I'm wondering if what it was that little packet of silica gel was going around and bumping a loose connection somewhere in there. So I decided to tape it down just to kind of protect it, at least for a little while. The other thing is, if you look at that picture, you'll see what looks like a rubber band wrapped around those posts near the back. And I thought about it for a minute, and I said, I wonder if that could be the weather seal. Because it opens up at the back. If you had a rubber ring around it, then it would seal nicely. And I'm not sure if it had already done that when I first had the camera, or if that happened when I opened it up. So I went ahead and put it back, and that pretty much took care of putting everything back together. Now I've got the camera back up and running here, and if you look, I wanted to show you a couple of the problems that I have in my situation. On the upper right, you'll see kind of a line of light, kind of a rectangle. Basically what that is a reflection, the sun reflecting off the upper deck of the apartment complex and then back down onto my window and showing up there. And then also, if you look to the left of the door, it might be a little hard to see, but there's a light there. Now, ultimately, when I repoint this camera in its final location, I'm going to have the light out of view, and I'm going to have it up again closer to the window than it is right now. Well, actually, a little further back. I'm going to put that shade back on it again. That ultimately cuts out all of that extraneous stuff, and by not having the light in the picture, if having the light in the picture would basically make the picture very dark, with the light being the lightest part of it. So all these little things you need to consider when you set up a security camera, but ultimately I wanted to cover that. So now we've got that put together. The next step is going to be to go ahead and get it working with the DVR software. So I'm going to go ahead and run the software that I mentioned earlier, which is for surveillance cameras, and it's an open source program, and so it's free to download, it's free to use if you use the basic functionality. If you want some additional functionality, you probably have to pay a fee. So here we go, we're going to open this up. Now I've already clicked to open it up, and you can see it's taking a little while. There we go. Okay. Okay, looks like the camera's gone, the media's gone, and down at the bottom here, there's a little thing. I don't know if you can see my mouse real well on here, but down in the bottom left corner, just above your start button and all that, it tells you how much the CPU is actually being used, and it dropped from like 80% to 0, or near 0. So I'm going to go ahead and add a camera, but we won't do the recording until the last minute. So I'm going to say add. Now in this particular case, because it's connected to a capture card, which is a USB device connected to the computer, I'm going to say local camera. The other options are IP cameras and various other ones that are available and can be hooked up to this. But what I've learned from watching other videos on YouTube with other people working with iSpy is that this is a local camera, and indeed I confirmed that earlier when I set it up to test it before I started recording all of this. So this is a local device. One thing with these cheap USB-based devices made in China is a lot of times they'll identify themselves differently depending on what system you're on, what program you're using. In this case, it's just called USB video device. If I click, there's only the one option. Capture mode, I want to capture video. Video resolution, I actually want to change that. It's defaulting to 320 by 240. Now this camera has 420 TV lines, which is not exactly the same thing as 420 lines vertical resolution, but ultimately it's a little bit less quality than VHS. Well, it's probably about VHS quality from my own testing. I was going to say it's less than DVD quality. So I'm going to change this to 640 by, actually not 640 by 480. I'm I want to do the 720 by 480 because this particular device was designed for making a DVD from a VHS. So the quality matches nicely with VHS. Why have DVD quality when your input is only VHS, which is lower quality than DVD? You're making a DVD, but you're making a DVD of a lower quality source. So 720 by 480 is DVD quality. That basically ensures me that I capture all the quality I can get out of this. Because if it's going to be for surveillance and I want to be able to try and identify something going on, this is not the best camera for that, but I want to keep as much of the quality as I can. So that takes care of that, and I'm going to say OK here. All the other tabs that are up above have to do with other cameras. So now you can see I've actually got the camera here. What it does is it pops up another window with a whole bunch of tabs at the top, and it's got a next button at the bottom and a back button, as well as the finish. So you can basically go through each of these tabs. If you click next, it'll go to the next tab, and you can configure whatever those particular options are that you're working with. The source, I can look at advanced properties, but basically that's brightness, contrast, hue, saturation, all of that. In this particular case, looking at the camera, probably about the only thing that would really help would be gamma. So let me try and turn that up and see if that helps. And it doesn't appear to be doing anything. Let me say apply. Let me try OK. And it doesn't look like it did anything. So I'm going to go to the advanced properties. I'm going to turn the gamma back down because I want to keep pretty much the same. You can see there's flickers of hope here as it's wigging out. Ultimately, during the day, it does give me a much more contrasty picture than what you're seeing right now. Unfortunately, just sometimes a day you can see the sun is just kind of peeking through right about here, and that's creating trouble. Plus, it's probably reflecting off one of the windows upstairs, which is creating this flare in here. It's something I'm just going to have to live with. The odds are, ultimately, if somebody's going to try and steal my car again, and I've got the camera pointing at it, they're probably not going to try and steal it at this time of day when everybody's out and talking to each other, and so I don't really think this is going to be an issue. I could change the name if I want to. I'll change it to car. I can't see my own keyboard here. I kind of have the lighting changed around a little bit, but I changed it to car. Groups, I'm not exactly sure what that is. I don't really care. Camera active, I'm not sure what the difference is there. Ultimately, this is all going to be in the documentation. This is an open source project, so somebody has probably spent a good deal of time working on the documentation to match up with all of these different options. Transform, rotate, none, flip, none, because ultimately it's in the right orientation. Timestamp, I'm going to leave the default because I kind of like that. I've worked with other video systems where, you see there was a flicker of really nice quality video there. I've worked with other systems where the timestamp is either on or off and you can't control the position, and unfortunately, like with the apartment complex here, there's one particular camera, and I'm not going to say which one it is, where there's a particular strategic location that we keep trying to look at, and the timestamp is right over it. So it's really unfortunate. Our only choice is our three choices really. There's always a choice of doing absolutely nothing. So that's the first choice. The second choice would be to replace the entire DVR system with something where I can configure the timestamp. Third option, I guess, is to turn the timestamp off, but that kind of makes it hard to search for things. And the fourth option would be to move the camera so that the timestamp, while it's still in its location, it ends up in a different location in the picture after the camera's been moved. So things to consider when you're dealing with security systems. But this particular one is giving me the frames per second followed by the date and time. And that is a fairly good measure, so I can understand when I'm looking at the video, if I'm trying to watch something back, it'll tell me if the frames per second dropped, then I'm going to see a very choppy video. And in this particular case, I'm only getting according to this, between 10 and 11 frames per second. But that actually, there's something down here that plays into that. Mask image. Oh, okay. I think what that means is I can actually add another, like a logo or something to the image here. I really don't need to do that. Picture in picture, you can actually create scenarios where you have one security camera in a window within the window for another security camera. I'm sure there are applications for that, but in my case, I don't need it. Now, this is what I would mention about the frame rate. Maximum frame rate in this case is set at 10. If I bump this up, now normal video, at least in the US, is 30 frames per second. Film is 24 frames per second. But I have a really slow machine, so I'm only going to bump it up to 15 for right now. And I can immediately see up here, and I'm sure it's not coming through in the video, but if it is, it would be clearer down here. It's showing 15 frames per second here. So actually, as an experiment, let me go ahead and bump this up to 30, which is the most that the camera is going to put out anyway. And here it's actually dropped back down to 10 frames per second. Oh, let me try and, well, no, I didn't even have to apply it last time. So that's kind of interesting. I bump it up to 30 and it drops to 10. So maybe there's a sweet spot and maybe we need to explore that a little. I've got it at 18. It's giving me 10 to 11. It's going above 11. It's up to 12. Now it's back down around 10. And the more movement you get in the picture, the less frames per second you're going to get. I'm going to drop it back down to 15 and let's see what happens there. I'm still getting about 10. So ultimately, for unless you have a really high sensitivity situation, you really only need about 7 frames per second. So 7.5, let's say, but this only gives me 7 or 8. It doesn't give me 7.5. If I drop it to 7, that should improve the performance overall. It should be able to give me, because there are less frames, it should be able to give me better quality frames. So that's your compromise you have to figure out, is how choppy are you willing to let the video be versus how good a quality do you need from the video. And so I'm going to set it at 7 here. It says when recording. I'm going to set that also at 7. And what I think this means, and I have to read the manual to confirm, but maximum frame rate is the overall maximum, the most number of pictures it can take in a second that it will then convert to video. When recording, the advantage there would be you could say your maximum frame rate is 30, but when recording you just drop it down to 7 because you want to make sure that you've got high quality on each individual frame. So I'm going to drop it to, the scenario is you could have higher maximum and a lower when recording. I think if I were to bump up the when recording, it probably wouldn't matter because the maximum is lower. So I'm just going to put them both at 7 because I think that's probably about the best performance I'm going to get out of this system. Recording, it says no recording, record on movement detection, or record on alert. So if there's an alert set up through some other plugin, I think that that's what that's about, then you can have it record on alert, which motion detection might actually provide an alert, and then you can record it that way. But in my case, I'm going to try and keep the amount of video down by using motion detection. Movement detection, same thing. Recording settings, I'm not sure what calibration delay is. I'm going to leave it alone. Inactivity record, I'm going to leave it alone. Minimum record time and maximum record time. Minimum 0, that's kind of makes sense to me. the maximum of 900 seconds. I think what that means is if it detects something, if there's some reason for it to start recording, the most it's going to do is record for 900 seconds. So I'm going to go ahead and leave those alone. Quality, I want to actually push as high as I can. Profile is the type of video that it's going to record. If you have a high-def camera or a good quality camera, H.264 is actually a pretty good choice, and that's their default. But I did read somewhere where they say you're actually, if you want better performance, you want to go with AVI, and so I'm going to pick WMV. Even though it says not available through website, ultimately what I'd like to do is set this up so I can download the videos off this machine through the website rather than switching the monitor on and trying to look at it that way. So I'm going to go ahead and try to get it configured. If not, I'll drop back to something else. So I'm going to go with WMV because I believe that will encode with less processor power than MPEG-4. Trigger recording, there are no triggers here, so there's nothing to do there. Cloud storage, what's cool about this program is you could actually have it upload when motion is detected and it decides to record, it could record and then upload your video to YouTube in a private mode that only you can see. You'd have to be logged into your YouTube account to be able to go get the video and watch it. It's not available to the public. There is an option here for turning it on for the public, but I think this is a paid option. There are other possible places where you can put it. Google Drive, which is grayed out here. So I think all of this, in fact, yeah, it says here you need an active subscription to enable these options. But just so you know, these are some options available. Scheduling. From what I'm understanding of scheduling, ultimately, if you know that you want your camera active and trying to track things when you're not at home, and you have a definite schedule, like you go to work 9 to 5, so you're probably out at 8 and you're back by 6, somewhere along those lines, then you could set it up to do that, and that way it's not actively working while you're at home and you can monitor your own things. In my case, I just want it to run 24/7 just because I may be sitting here, I may not be watching the monitor and looking at what's going on by my car, which is the whole point of this, is to protect my car or gather information after the fact if something happens. I want it running 24/7 just so I catch everything. So I'm not going to use a schedule. Storage. Here's where you end up determining where it's going to land on your hard drive. And if I had an external hard drive, I could change it to that. But ultimately, I'm going to accept their default because they have it set up rather nicely within their web server, within the folder structure for their web server. So I don't want to mess around with it. There is storage management, which I do want to enable here. And the max folder size is set for 1024 megabytes, which is a gigabyte. That's basically saying that all the videos that get recorded would be limited in total to a gigabyte. Once it hits a gigabyte, it's going to start deleting the oldest recordings. Now, my fear is that with some of the wigging out that's going on with the camera, it'll exceed a gigabyte rather quickly, and I'll end up losing precious videos. I won't even be able to track 24 full hours. So I want to increase this. I'm just going to add a 0 at the end, which is basically 10 gigabytes. So we'll try 10 gigabytes. We'll run it for a day, and we'll see if I get the full day. If I don't, then I'll bump it up again. I have about 100 gigs on the hard drive available, but I don't want to overdo it either. Max age in hours. So if 10 gigabytes turns out that I could record an entire week, but or maybe on one particular active day, like it's been very windy around here lately, and you've probably been able to see that little whirlybird thing spinning around while I've been talking. If you could record for an entire week on the amount that you set the max folder size on, then you could actually set an age limit on the files. So 72 hours is basically saying when it goes to record a new video, it's going to look at what the videos are in there, and it's going to say, are any of these videos more than 72 hours? Then we'll delete those to make space for newer recordings. So I'm going to leave that at 72. I have a feeling that even 10 gigs is not going to give me a full 24 hours, but we'll come back and look at it tomorrow and we'll see. And that was the last tab. That brings us back to this motion detection. Now, yesterday I was playing around with this and I tried background modeling because I thought rather than using their default of 2 frames, which I think I understand what it means, I wanted to try this background modeling because it sounded interesting. Like it would try and figure out what the background of the scene is and not track, or there's certain places where it would assume that would never move. And so if those things are never going to move, then there's no reason to track. It didn't seem to work too well because the camera was wigging out and it kept recording. So I'm going to try 2 frames, which is their default, and they probably picked it for a reason. And in fact, here's usage tips, which I could go and read and try and find out. Now, I'm going to try the 2 frames. Trigger range 20 to 100, or no, the trigger range is a slider. This is the sensitivity. So if I set it to be particularly sensitive, then it's going to trigger and start recording on the smallest little movement. If I change the sensitivity, if I reduce the sensitivity, then it would take more movement for it to be convinced that something is happening and start recording. Now, at this particular setting, which was the default, that's what I tested it at, and it was freaking out. So I'm going to lower this. I'm going to push it down to about half. Okay, and I can see the numbers here are changing. So that's 43.8 out of 100. So I'm guessing that basically, if I just set this at 50, I'll be halfway. And it was 20 to start with, so I know that, so I can go back to it. The gain, I have to assume, is a part of how it figures out if things are moving. It's called 2 frames, I believe, because it's comparing one frame to the next frame and saying, are these exactly the same or is there something different? And there's a certain amount of sensitivity built into how do you determine how much difference there is. So with that, I'm going to basically keep these as is. I'm going to keep these changes, and I think I'm going to leave everything else as is because I don't understand enough of this. I don't want to overestimate what's going on. Detection zones. Okay, this is exactly what I was looking for. So here's the thing. I'm wanting to watch my car. I'm not as much interested in everything else that's going on around here. And it says click and drag to draw rectangles. So if I've got the camera reasonably straight, I should be able to draw, yep, oh that's nice. I'm going to draw a rectangle right there, and that's going to block out that entire wall. So I don't care if I see movement here, especially if these plants are moving. For that matter, I don't really care if I see this little spinner moving, because that has nothing to do with my security. I'm going to draw another rectangle here. I'm going to block out all of this. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a window here in the middle. And let me see if I can't draw another. That's not a perfect rectangle. Okay, I think I finally got it. You just got to kind of play around with it. I'm not sure if it's buggy or if there's something I don't know about. Ultimately, I should have read the manual before I started telling you all of this. But I got those 2 regions, and the reason why I left it open at the bottom, and in fact, now that I look at it, I need to block out just a little bit more because that little whirlybird thing there. And because I don't want that to trigger motion. The reason I left it there is because I've noticed while I've had the camera up while I was waiting to get all of this figured out, and I've been watching the camera while I've been playing around with software, I've noticed a couple of local kids that will come through that doorway and walk right through the garden. So I want to be able to see those kids walking through the garden, which is why I'm leaving that spot below the walkway open for detection. Alright, with that all set, let's go ahead and say finish. Directory exists, delete existing contents. I'm going to say yes, because I believe what that is that's the media directory. But now we've got it running at 7 frames per second, watching what's going on. And let's just see if the wind picks up. Well, you know what? I'm just going to go away and come back after I got a couple of videos, and I'll show you what it looks like. But aside from that, we're almost done. Holy cow, this thing actually works. I'm really happy. Look at it. You can actually see the wind blowing things around, and it hasn't triggered. There's no little red frame around the video. But the other thing is, I just tested this out. I decided rather than waiting for somebody to walk by, which I can't really show on video anyway, because that violates their privacy, I went ahead and walked out there myself. So watch out, YouTube. You're about to see me. And this was interesting. I walked up to just out of frame and then walked, and you can see me going by. So all I got to do, here's the media that pops up from this. And I'm going to click that, and you can see me going by. Yeah, I'm not a small guy. And that's one video. And this is actually, they have their own internal player, so you can play it that way. Let me see. That's the most recent. Actually, that's a pizza guy walking in. I'm not sure what happened there. He got in the gate somehow, and then he was trying to figure out where he was going, but I can't show him. I think this is the other one, or did I already play this one? No, that's me walking by. Alright, now you've seen me twice. Here goes number 3. This is me walking the other way, and then heading over by my car. So you can see it actually triggered correctly. And I figured one other thing out while I was out there walking around. It just dawned on me that if I go and see, now if I click on edit, I'm editing my camera, but it gives me the ability to go into that motion detection again. And remember I said I set this window up down here so that I'd be able to catch kids walking through the garden. Well, it occurs to me, if they're walking through the garden, they're going to walk into frame. I'm going to be able to see their body up above the walkway, so I can take this rectangle and extend it over that way. Oops, I left a little gap. I can extend it over that way. And ultimately, I can block that out too, because anything that comes in this little window is what I'm concerned about. If it's the kids coming along and walking through the garden, I'm still going to catch them. So I'm really happy. This is actually working very well. I think I got the sensitivity set up just right. I may discover other situations where I need to tweak it, but I'm very happy with what this looks like and how it's working. I'm going to go ahead and say finish here, because the system's active. It's got the white frame around it right now because it's not doing anything. I'm sure you'll see this rotate again probably before I wrap up the video, but folks, I got it done. I do this DIYary series, succeed or fail, so that you people can see what happens when you take on a project. This one was very, very long. I'm going to have to work on cutting it down, but I'm happy. I'm very, very happy. This is working. I can basically leave it alone now and wait and see what pops up. I can go take a rest. I'm a happy guy. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, please, click the thumbs up or the thumbs down. Tell me what you felt about this video. And if you like my videos, go ahead and subscribe. I do all sorts of things on this channel. It originally started just as a little gardening channel with me saying, here's what's in my garden, and, oh, today this one's doing this much better, and there's another plant that's not doing so well. I do experiments to try and figure out, what will make them grow better. I had a balcony originally. I ended up moving to another apartment that had a patio. That was bliss. Now I live in an apartment where I don't actually have a formal gardening space, but they have allowed me to put some plants out. That's why you see that little whirly bird out there. This is just the space outside my apartment, and they basically said, look, there's nothing major growing there. Feel free, go ahead and put some plants. I said, if I put plants, I'm not going to plant them in the ground. I'll put them in pots so they can be removed if they need to be. I'm just excited. What can I say? But thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day. And that's it. Hey folks, I sincerely hope that you found this video useful. Please feel free to let me know with the thumbs up or the thumbs down, and feel free to subscribe. This project was important to me, and I honestly hope that it will help someone else too. Please let me know if it helps or if you have any questions. Thanks.